Welcome to the Fantasy's Finest Fantasy Football Podcast. Here are your hosts, William Spencer, Jalen McQueen, and Mark Carter.
What's going on? Welcome back to the Fantasy's Finest Podcast. I am your host, William Spencer, and we are getting ready for our brand new season. So we've got to get into these moves that have happened just before free agency, because now we're in the tampering window where moves can be made or deals can be brokered, but they can't be processed until the 12th, which is the beginning of the new league year and the full awakening. Not full awakening. I'll see. That's what you say when you watch too much anime. The full go for free agency is on March 12th. Everything gets to go and be made official. So there have already been some moves been made. DK Metcalf has been traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Geno Smith has been traded from Seattle. He is now a Las Vegas Raider. Davante Adams has landed with the Los Angeles Rams. And there's a couple other moves we're going to talk about. We have to gauge the fantasy fallout from these moves or have an initial reaction. We'll probably have to go even further deeper into how these moves can impact fantasy managers in 2025. And we got some other news to take care of too. Plenty of stuff is on the docket. So what a way to kick off a brand new season of the podcast as we get ready to go into free agency for the 2025 season. Because if you're playing fantasy football, you need to be aware of what's going on right now, because this can help you set the tone for your fantasy season by being aware of what's going on, following who's being moved where, how these new offenses are gonna impact their new fantasy value, whether it's going to go up or down. Where are you going to be picking these players, or where you could possibly be picking these players? And we'll get into some of the other stuff as we get closer to the fantasy season. But make sure that you're locked in with the Fantasy's Finest podcast on our YouTube channel at Fantasy's Finest. You can also follow us on our social medias at FS Finest. We've updated, so we got a new little handle. Make sure you check that out too. If you listen to the audio, you can check us out on Apple, Spotify, Odyssey, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So let's get into it. So we got news and notes going up first, and then we're going to get into some of these trades that have happened, these new moves that have happened, and see what's going on with their fantasies, with these guys' fantasy value going into the next season. But let's get into it. News and notes.
News and notes from around the NFL.
All right, first up, Myles Garrett. His saga is officially over. Myles Garrett and the Browns agreed to a new 4-year deal, $204 million with $123.5 million guaranteed. He's averaging $40 million a year. He is now the highest paid non-quarterback player in the NFL. Garrett was trying to get out, or he initially said he wanted to be traded away from the team. The Browns brass was not having it. They were not going to let him go, which makes sense because, Myles Garrett is one of the best defensive ends in the league. Why would you trade him? And then you may not get what you've been asking for on the trade market, but Myles Garrett is going to be staying with the Cleveland Browns for another 4 years. If we're being honest, did Myles Garrett really have a choice? Sure, he could have held out, but it would have been fruitless for him to do that, because you hold out, you're not getting paid. I don't think he had any extra guaranteed money on his contract his old contract for the next 2 years. He's under contract for the next 2 years on that deal, on that former deal. So it's not really advantageous for him to do that, because you're not going to get paid. You're just wasting time, even if he did want to hold out. And there were reports or rumors that he was going to hold out if he didn't get traded. But I guess they decided to sit down and have a talk, and Haslam slid that check over to him. I was like, look, man, I understand you want to leave, but we're willing to pay you to be the top guy at defensive end at $40 million a year. And you know what Myles Garrett did? Myles Garrett was like, you know what? Let me stop playing and take this check. I can't even be mad at Myles Garrett for that, man. You throw $40 million a year at me? I'm definitely taking it. All right, let's keep going. NFL insider Josina Anderson reports that the Eagles are holding out hope for at least a 4th-round pick for tight end Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert is going to be a free agent in 2026. He's on the final year of his deal. The Eagles want a 4th-rounder for him. He's 30 years old. Do you want a 30-year-old tight end? And he can't stay healthy? Would you give up a 4th-round pick for Dallas Goedert? Now, let me say this. Dallas Goedert is a talented tight end. I don't know if I would give up a 4th-round pick for him. If I needed a tight end, maybe, but I could just go to the draft or, take Evan Ingram, who got released from the Jacksonville Jaguars. I could go that route if I wanted to. I think he's a little bit younger. He might not be younger, but I have to fact check that. But Dallas Goedert for a 4th. I guess if I needed a tight end, I would probably make that trade. But Dallas Goedert is on the market. I didn't see that coming. He just won a Super Bowl. All right. We're going to talk about this in detail because he's one of the guys on our list for the fantasy fallout section. But Seattle Seahawks, this was big news when it happened. Geno Smith traded to the Raiders. The Athletic's Diana Rossini reports that the Seahawks were expected. Well, this is coinciding with the story, so it's all one story. The Seattle Seahawks did trade Geno Smith. They traded him for a 3rd-round pick and sent him over to the Las Vegas Raiders. And the Raiders, per reports, are planning to give Geno Smith a long-term deal to stay with the Raiders. That part I didn't see coming. I didn't realize that Geno Smith had so much love and pull to get a long-term deal with the Raiders. I mean, they do got some money to blow, but I just didn't see that happening. Then, to coincide with that move, the Athletic's Diana Rossini reports that Seattle is expected to talk to free agent Aaron Rodgers, who was released from the Jets. The Seattle is now in the market for looking for a new quarterback. They've also been tied to Sam Darnold, who's expected to hit, he's going to hit free agency. It doesn't seem like Minnesota is going to give him a new deal or give him a long-term deal. So if Sam Darnold hits the free agent market, Sam Darnold, Aaron Rodgers, there's a couple other names that are floating around that are going to be in that new quarterback carousel for the free agency. It's going to be interesting to see where those guys end up at. But it sounds like Aaron Rodgers could be going to Seattle. If he does, it'll probably be more. They've been talking about, if Rodgers was to land in Seattle, it would be more of a move to facilitate rebuilding the offense. So it's more like a bridge gap kind of situation. Rodgers isn't no spring chicken. He's 41 years old. Aaron Rodgers with Seattle, it probably wouldn't be bad, but you got to figure if they're going in a rebuild type situation, they need another wide receiver because they already flipped DK Metcalf. They do have Jackson Smith and Jigma, who's nice, but they don't really have anything else after that. Their running game is pretty decent. Their offensive line, their defense probably need a little retooling. So, I mean, you're probably going to be trying to target a real quarterback, not a real quarterback, I'm sorry, Aaron Rodgers, a franchise quarterback, a long-term franchise quarterback in the 2026 NFL draft. And Diana Rossini has been busy. She also has stated that the Steelers are expected to make an offer for Sam Darnold. Now, I'm just going to leave it at that because this is also part of the Fallout segment, so I don't want to, give anything away. But the Steelers are losing Russell Wilson. They're losing Justin Fields. There's been reports out that Justin Fields and the Steelers have been keeping in contact with each other, having open dialogue. But the Jets are also reportedly in on Justin Fields. So if they get their hands on Justin Fields, the Steelers are going to have to make a pitch for Sam Darnold because they need somebody to come in. I wouldn't be surprised if Sam Darnold is already in contract talks with the Steelers or they already have a deal done, because it doesn't make sense to trade for DK Metcalf without having that quarterback situation already taken care of. You know what I'm saying? Like, why would I trade for DK Metcalf and pair him with George Pickens when I don't have a quarterback or I don't have my quarterback situation resolved? And why would DK Metcalf go to the Steelers without knowing who his quarterback is? So I wouldn't be surprised if Sam Darnold is their quarterback for the future with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But hopefully we'll find out once the tampering window, like I said, the tampering window is open. So we may find out something sooner rather than later. But, you know, fingers crossed if you're a Steelers fan. But that'll do it for the news. Let's get into the fantasy fallout and see what the landscape is going to be for these guys that have landed in new spots.
And now for our feature presentation.
All right. Now, we already talked about some of these guys in the news segment. I didn't want to get too detailed about it. But DK Metcalf is probably the biggest signing or biggest trade news that has happened prior to the tampering window. So DK Metcalf traded to the Steelers. They sent over Metcalf was traded to the Steelers from Seattle. They got a second round pick from the Steelers. Remember, if you were paying attention to the reports, the Steelers, the Seattle Seahawks rather, were trying to get a first and a third for DK Metcalf initially. That was their first pitch. You know, you got to give us those two picks if you want DK Metcalf. And teams was like, all right, so here's the thing. You want me to give up a first round pick for DK Metcalf, a first and a third, and then you want me to turn around and pay him $30 million or $30+ million? That makes sense to you? And then, you know, Seattle was like, well, I mean, yeah, he is DK Metcalf. You know, he is a really good wide receiver. And teams was like, nah, we're not doing that. And their reports were already shuffling from a first and a third to at least a third. And then Josina Anderson came out and said, you know what, they will be looking to get a second round pick for DK Metcalf. And the Steelers was like, you know what, as a second, man, we can part with that. Sent that over to him. And on top of that, DK gets his money, a 5-year, $150 million contract for the new Steelers wide receiver. Now, here's the thing. We know how talented DK Metcalf is. We know how dangerous of a wide receiver he is downfield. He's a big body wide receiver. He moves. He's faster than I wouldn't even say he's faster than he looks. This dude just gets out. He's got outright speed for somebody as big as him. Crazy. But we still don't know what the quarterback situation is looking like for the Steelers right now. Now, let's say Sam Darnold does become the new quarterback for the Steelers. That would be a good thing for DK Metcalf. Sam Darnold looked the part last season with the Minnesota Vikings. He had Justin Jefferson. He had Jordan Addison. He looked like a legit quarterback last season. And I'll be honest, I definitely didn't see that coming. I had him flopping out. Didn't think he was going to do what he did last year. I mean, how we've seen Sam Darnold over the last few seasons prior to him ending up with, you know, the Minnesota Vikings. Was Sam Darnold doing what he did last year on the docket? Like, you knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Sam Darnold was going to turn the page and be one of the top quarterbacks or leading one of the Minnesota Vikings to the playoffs with the kind of record that they have? No, at least I didn't believe it. But Sam Darnold made a fool out of me last season because he smoked my fantasy takes with prejudice. So Sam Darnold with DK Metcalf and George Pickens, that could be a good situation if he is in fact the quarterback for the Steelers come the start of the season. Metcalf finished as the wide receiver 32 with Geno Smith last season, just 12.7 fantasy points per game. That's not great numbers, especially where you're picking DK Metcalf probably around somewhere between the third and fourth round. or between rounds 3 and 5. He's going somewhere in there because he is a talented wide receiver. He's put up numbers before, but he just couldn't really get on with Geno Smith last season, and the emergence of Jackson Smith and Jigma kind of took some luster off of DK Metcalf. But now he gets paired with George Pickens. Both wide receivers are kind of the similar profile. They're both deep threats. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Steelers mitigate those big plays between both DK Metcalf and George Pickens. Last season, in terms of air yards, Pickens ranked 4th in air yards among wide receivers at 101, almost 101 per game. Metcalf was right behind him at 98.3 air yards per game. So both of these guys can get after it downfield. It's just a matter of, is the offense that the Steelers are going to put on the field this year, should they get Sam Darnold, is it going to be one of those offenses where they're just going to air the ball out because they have two big deep threat wide receivers out there in DK Metcalf and George Pickens? Or is it going to be one of those things where they're going to stay true to the Steelers, kind of alma mater of running the ball and controlling the clock and controlling the tempo of the game? Sam Darnold himself, he was actually pretty good in terms of air yards too. He ranked 8th among quarterbacks last season in air yards. So Sam Darnold has shown the ability to get the ball downfield. Now, we'll get to see whether or not this is a situation where, was it the Kevin Connell effect for Sam Darnold, or is it something that's been there with Sam Darnold? He just couldn't get it out because, his other stops were kind of on the poor side. So we'll get to see we'll get an answer to that this season. If I'm drafting, hopefully you're not doing any drafts this early. Nobody should be doing any drafts this early. And I don't even think best ball season is kicking off just yet. But if I was to draft today, I would probably take a dart throw at DK Metcalf. I like DK Metcalf. I didn't like his situation with Geno Smith last season. I wasn't crazy about it. So I passed on DK Metcalf for most of my fantasy leagues. I don't think I had any shares of DK Metcalf. But Metcalf, if it's Sam Darnold, I'd be more willing to take the chance because I know what the quarterback is, or at least what he's perceived to be. But I would try and get him as my wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. It all depends on my strategy. If I can go and get a couple of wide receivers ahead of where Metcalf would be drafted, I might take the shot, depending on who's on the board. So that's something that you always have to pay attention to, who's on the board when you're drafting. But right now, until we get more concrete information about that quarterback situation, Metcalf's probably more risk than a reward until we figure out that solution to the quarterback question. Davante Adams. Now, this may be a better situation than DK Metcalf because he gets a bona fide quarterback now. He signed a 2-year deal with the Los Angeles Rams, 2 years, $46 million. This signals that Cooper Kupp is going to get released. He's either going to get released or he's going to get traded. But I see the former of him getting released happening. It sounds like, Cooper Kupp or the Los Angeles Rams want too much for Cooper Kupp. I can't remember any of the reports on the trade value of what they wanted, but I think it was maybe a third or maybe a second or third for Cooper Kupp. That's probably too high, considering how much time he's missed over the last few seasons because of injuries, his age, But if we're looking at his talent, the talent is still there. It's just a matter of trying to meet somebody in the middle on that asking price. But if Cooper Kupp is out, Davante Adams is likely going to assume his role as the wide receiver 2 behind Puka Nacua. Kupp saw 100 targets over the 2024 season. He missed 6 games because of injury. So he averaged 8.3 targets per game. Now, if you take that number and you extrapolate it over a 17-game season, that comes out to about 141 targets for Cooper Kupp. Now, if he's getting 141 targets, we already know Puka's going to be seeing a lot of targets, so that's neither here nor there. But this is just just to show you. I gotta get the words out. This is just to show you the amount of volume that comes with Matthew Stafford and his Rams offense. So Davante Adams landing in LA with one of the best high volume passing attacks in the NFL with Matthew Stafford, with the kind of target share that he'll have, even as the wide receiver 2, this is a good landing spot. Now, the thing that sucks is if you're in Dynasty and you had Jordan Whittington, he's probably going to take a back seat because of this move. He's probably going to slide to the wide receiver 3 or 4 position. Remember, they did bring back Tutu Atwell. They signed him to a 1-year deal. And Tutu Atwell actually out-targeted Jordan Whittington 62-28 in terms of targets. So Adams is going to be the guy directly behind Puka Nacua. But in terms of, like I said, in terms of target share, this is where you're going to get Davante Adams is going to be, at least right now, he's going to be a solid wide receiver 2 for fantasy managers, depending on where you're probably going to have to take him a little bit early, but he's got that upside because the volume is there. Davante Adams didn't even slow down last season. He had some solid games even after he was traded to the Jets. Now, we know the Jets offense overall was not spectacular, but when you look at Davante Adams' production over that season, I think he played 3 games with the Raiders before being traded, and then he landed with the Jets for the rest of the season. He was putting up some solid fantasy numbers. So, and he finished as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. So you couple that with an even better situation with LA, I would definitely be all over getting Davante Adams on my fantasy team this coming season. Now, Deebo Samuels, this trade happened a little bit earlier, but Deebo Samuels traded to the Washington Commanders. Now, I have to preface this by saying that the Commanders' wide receiver situation was not, it wasn't the greatest. Then their number 2 was De'Ami Brown by the end of the season. So you had now I'm gonna butcher this boy, Zacchaeus. I'm gonna just say Zacchaeus. You had Zacchaeus, you had Noah Brown, but De'Ami Brown was probably the better option between those 3. And now De'Ami Brown is a free agent. So Deebo Samuels is likely to slide in as the wide receiver 2. Not likely. I mean, he is. They're paying him. So he's going to be the wide receiver 2 for Jaden Daniels in 2024. He didn't do fantasy managers any favors last year. Just 10.2 fantasy points per game. He only saw 81 targets over 15 games that he was playing in. 5.4 targets per game. Deebo just wasn't seeing a lot of work, even when he was in the lineup. This could be a thing where it changes. He could see more targets. He'll likely take targets away from Zacchaeus and Noah Brown. Those guys will probably slide to the back of the depth chart. Deebo will be moved up front. The snaps will be there. It's just a matter of, can he get on with Jaden Daniels? And if you're willing to take that, because I have a feeling that Deebo's price, his ADP is going to shoot up because Jaden Daniels is just that good, or he's shown to be that good. If his ADP is inflated, like you're talking maybe round 3 or round 4, I'm probably gonna pass. His price is probably just gonna be too high. There's probably gonna be better options to take in those rounds over a Deebo Samuels. I don't know, man. He does give you the rushing aspect, which is always something that you look for to get an edge on in fantasy. But if he's not going to give you the passing production, and because the Commanders' offense, their passing attack is not high volume like that, is Deebo really going to be able to get on? Because Terry McLaurin is that guy. He's the number 1 option for the Commanders, and Zach Ertz is a safety blanket for Jaden Daniels in case he gets into tight spots. So it's like, is Deebo really going to benefit, or is the Commanders, or are the Commanders rather, they're going to bump up those passing attempts from Jaden Daniels this season because they've seen what he's capable of, and they want to open up that passing attack a little bit more. But for me, I'm probably going to pass on Debo. Debo's not somebody that I want to take a chance on. Like I said, there's probably better options depending on where you're picking him. So I'm probably going to go that route. Now, Geno Smith. We talked about him a little earlier during the news segment. He's with the Raiders now. The Raiders, they're kind of in flux. The Raiders don't have a lot of pieces, but they do have a lot of cap space. So I expect the Raiders to really get involved in free agency this offseason. They're going to be one of the names. They should be picking up wide receivers. They should be looking at running backs. All of those positions for fantasy, there's probably going to be a substantial amount of volume. Geno Smith isn't a slouch. He finished 4th in passing yards in the 2024 season, 21-15 touchdown to interception ratio. It's just that he wasn't putting up big fantasy numbers. 15.6 fantasy points per game. That's good enough for 18th among quarterbacks. So you're not taking Geno Smith with the expectation that, yo, man, I'm going to win a league with him. If you have Geno Smith in like a 2 QB league, that's probably decent. But in your average 12-team, 1 QB leagues, Geno Smith is probably a waiver wire ad for a bye week at best. So you're not looking to get Geno Smith on your fantasy team. If anything, you're looking for Geno Smith to see how he's going to add production to those skill positions. Jacoby Myers is probably going to be the beneficiary of having Geno Smith. Will the Raiders pick up a wide receiver through the draft or free agency? We don't know yet. But right now, Jacoby Myers is the guy who's going to be soaking up those targets. But he's more like your wide receiver 3 in fantasy right now. He's not going to be a big name where you're going to have to spend up huge ADP to go get him. But the volume is going to be there at least. So that's an option where you're looking to add a wide receiver late. Jacoby Myers should be on your target list to get him. Geno Smith finished as the quarterback 14 in fantasy points overall. It's not horrible, but that's just outside the top 12. He does get Pete Carroll back. That's a plus. And that's probably why he's getting that long-term deal, or why they're trying to work out a long-term deal to get Geno Smith. But Geno Smith, this is more of a wait-and-see situation. We're waiting to see what the offense is going to look like after free agency and after the draft. And how well is Geno Smith going to be expected to lead this offense and see how it's going to impact those skill position players, especially Brock Bowers at tight end, because he had a crazy fantasy season as a rookie. But Geno Smith doesn't really get involved with the tight ends. So what are we going to do with that? What are the Raiders going to do with that? Those are questions we got to get answers to, and we haven't really seen anything as of yet. But if you got Geno Smith, if you have Brock Bowers or you have Jacoby Myers, those are the things you're going to be looking for to see if Geno Smith can get production or add production to those two guys for fantasy. All right, and the last one on our list is Christian Kirk, traded to the Houston Texans for a 2026 7th round pick. That's crazy. But Kirk was on the last year of his contract deal, or his last year of his deal. He signed a 4-year deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're shipping him to Houston. The Houston Texans wide receivers are either decimated or hitting free agency. Stephon Diggs is a free agent. Tank Dell is likely to miss the 2025 season because of his torn ACL injury. Kirk has potential to be a number 2 wide receiver behind Nico Collins. We just have to figure out whether or not they're going to take a wide receiver. They need another wide receiver. So it's possible with free agency, we could see them grab a guy off their free agent pile and add them to the team, or draft one. So at the moment, Kirk does have a path where he can have fantasy value in 2025 if they don't add a prominent quarterback, not quarterback, because they have CJ Stroud. Why would they add a quarterback? But they could add a wide receiver to the mix, which could change the scope of Christian Kirk's fantasy value. Now, Kirk is going to be playing out of the slot for Houston, similar to how Stephon Diggs did it in 2024. Diggs had a great fantasy season until he got injured. So Kirk, like I said, Kirk does have a path to have some fantasy value with the Houston Texans. Now, 2024 was not great for him. Just 379 yards receiving, just one touchdown, 8.9 fantasy points per game with the Jacksonville Jaguars and the great Trevor Lawrence. But finished as a wide receiver 61 according to fantasydata.com. So that's not great. And it's not inspiring for fantasy managers looking to get a deal. But CJ Stroud is looking to come out of his funk that he had in 2024. They should be looking to revamp their offensive line to keep him upright. And that could be a positive for how the passing attack could go. They also have a new offensive coordinator. So there's a lot of things in flux in Houston. But if you're looking, I think Christian Kirk is going to be one of those value wide receivers that you're going to get later on in the draft after some of the big names have come off the boards, because like I said, there's a path where he can get that extra target share that Stephon Diggs had, that Tank Dell had. Christian Kirk can play downfield, so he could play into the deep ball aspect of CJ Stroud and the Texans offense. We don't really know what the Texans offense is going to be right now since they switched hands at offensive coordinator, but you're behind Nico Collins. There's plenty of targets that are still left out there. So like similar to Jacoby Myers, in terms of volume, there's a path where Christian Kirk could get on and have some fantasy value, but you're not going to spend a lot to get him on your fantasy teams. So he's going to be a guy that you can get at a value. But that'll wrap it up for this episode. Thanks for checking out the latest episode of the Fantasy's Finest podcast. Make sure that you're checking out our YouTube channel. We're going to close it down and get ready to collect some of this extra news that's going to be coming out. Free agency is going to be a blast. And hopefully my Cowboys get active and bring some players in free agency. But we'll see. But that'll be it for this episode. Thank you for checking us out, and I will see you on our next one. Take it easy, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy's Finest podcast. Be sure to join the community on Facebook and follow us on Twitter too at the Fantasy's Finest. See you next episode.